What takes place when one of Hollywood's most admired performers steps onto a daytime talk show expecting a cordial conversation, only to find himself confronted by a host who appears intent on dismantling him in front of a national audience? What unfolded became one of the most intense clashes ever seen on daytime television, as Mark Wahlberg's composure was pushed to its limit during what began as an ordinary guest appearance on The View. It wasn't simply an awkward celebrity segment. It became a vivid example of how rapidly a situation can unravel when mutual respect disappears. The bright studio lights illuminated the set as Mark Wahlberg eased into his seat, straightening his blazer with the relaxed assurance of someone accustomed to media appearances. He had arrived to promote his newest project, an emotional drama centered on redemption and second chances, film that critics had been praising enthusiastically. During the commercial break, the panel, including Whoopi Goldberg and Sarah Haynes, had welcomed him warmly. The atmosphere had felt friendly and upbeat, yet there was a noticeable difference in Joy Behar's posture. Positioned at the end of the table, she flipped through her cue cards with a focus that felt unusually intense for what was meant to be a light promotional chat. As the show returned from break, Whoopi introduced him with her signature calm. The conversation opened smoothly. Mark smiled, expressing gratitude for the invitation and enthusiasm about discussing the film. For a brief moment everything seemed routine. Then Joy leaned forward, her pen tapping against her notes. She shifted the direction abruptly. Before discussing the movie, she said, there was something else that needed attention, something that had been weighing on people's minds. The change in tone was immediate and unmistakable. Mark's expression tightened slightly as he turned toward her, bracing himself. Joy spoke bluntly about his past, referencing the narrative of a reformed troublemaker who had rebuilt his life. She challenged that portrayal, suggesting that his earlier actions went far beyond youthful misjudgment. The other hosts exchanged uneasy looks. This detour had not been previewed. Sarah shifted in her chair, and Whoopi's face registered concern. Mark inhaled slowly, clasping his hands together on the desk. He responded evenly, emphasizing that he had never concealed his past. He acknowledged serious mistakes made in his youth and stressed that he had devoted decades to growth and accountability. Joy pressed harder. She referenced the violent incidents from his teenage years, describing them in stark terms and questioning how someone with that history could now be celebrated as a respected public figure. The studio fell silent, the faint mechanical hum of cameras the only background noise. Mark's jaw flexed, and for a moment it seemed he might stand up and leave. Instead, he leaned back, speaking in a measured tone. He clarified the legal details and reiterated that what he had done was wrong and inexcusable. He described himself as a misguided teenager from a difficult Boston neighborhood who had made harmful decisions and had since worked tirelessly to change. Joy continued, citing specifics of the assault involving a Vietnamese man when Mark was 17. She recounted the racial slurs, the physical attack, and the lasting harm caused. The audience sat frozen, sensing the escalation. Whoopi attempted to steer the discussion elsewhere, but Joy interrupted, insisting that society too often rushes to rehabilitate public figures while victims live with permanent consequences. She pointed out that he had served only 45 days in jail and argued that such a brief sentence could not possibly balance the damage inflicted. Mark's composure began to fray. His face reddened, and his hands tightened into fists. He responded by naming the man Johnny Tren, and explained that they had met in person. He said they had spoken at length and that forgiveness had been extended. According to him, there had been reconciliation. Joy reacted skeptically, her tone laced with sarcasm. She implied that wealth and fame can influence narratives and questioned whether money had played a role in that forgiveness. That suggestion shifted the atmosphere entirely. Mark moved forward in his chair, his voice rising for the first time. He rejected the implication outright, asking how she could suggest such a thing without evidence. The accusation struck a nerve. Joy remained composed, even slightly amused, asserting that she was reacting to what she observed at a man who had committed racially charged violence, spent a relatively short time incarcerated, and later rose to global stardom. She argued that Hollywood often rewards individuals despite troubling histories, and she challenged the framing of his journey as inspirational. Mark's frustration became more visible, his Boston accent sharpening as emotion crept into his words. He countered that she was reducing a complex human transformation into a political talking point. He admitted again that he had been angry, reckless, and destructive in his youth. He acknowledged hurting people, but he also described himself as a product of a harsh environment in Dorchester, shaped by poverty and limited opportunities. He spoke about the reality of growing up surrounded by violence and instability, suggesting that those circumstances contributed to his mindset at the time. Joy folded her arms, unimpressed. She dismissed what she saw as a familiar narrative of hardship used to soften accountability. Her expression suggested she believed the explanation was an attempt to deflect rather than confront. The exchange had fully transformed from promotional conversation into confrontation. The audience remained silent, aware they were witnessing something far more volatile than daytime television typically delivers. What began as a routine appearance had evolved into a raw collision over responsibility, redemption, and the complicated space between past wrongdoing and present success. "Rich boy?" Mark's laugh came out sharp and humorless. "You don't know anything about my life," he shot back. He described growing up as one of 9 children in a fractured household. His father left when he was 11, and his mother juggled multiple jobs just to keep groceries in the kitchen. He said he was getting into trouble and dealing drugs before most kids his age were thinking about high school. Then he added, with clear resentment, that it was easy for someone to paint him as a spoiled, entitled kid who woke up one day and chose hatred for entertainment. Around the table, the other panelists looked increasingly uneasy. Sarah appeared to shrink into her seat, wishing the spotlight would move elsewhere. Even Whoopi seemed unsure how to steer the exchange back to safer territory. The cameras continued broadcasting every second, capturing the rising tension without interruption. Joy pressed forward without hesitation. She challenged his explanation, asking whether his difficult upbringing justified harming innocent people. She questioned whether his struggles gave him permission to make someone else's life worse. Her tone suggested she viewed his background as an excuse rather than an explanation. Suddenly, Mark's palm hit the tabletop with a loud crack that made several people flinch. He insisted he wasn't offering excuses but providing context. There was a difference, he argued, between defending an action and explaining the circumstances that led to it. He suggested that nuance was being ignored in favor of a simplified narrative. The sharp sound of his hand striking the desk echoed through the studio. For a brief second, Joy's eyes widened, but her expression quickly hardened again, almost as if the outburst reinforced her criticism. She replied coolly that her perspective didn't include assaulting defenseless individuals and then expecting applause decades later. In her view, acting talent did not erase violent behavior. Mark inhaled deeply, his chest rising and falling as he fought to steady himself. The other hosts looked as though they wanted to vanish from the stage. Whoopi tried once more to slow things down, suggesting they reset the tone, but Mark cut in, his voice suddenly low and firm. He said if the subject was going to be pursued, then it should be discussed accurately. He pointed out that the legal charges brought against him did not include the specific label Joy kept using. He accused her of throwing around dramatic terminology for impact rather than precision. Joy responded by reading from her notes assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, criminal intimidation, and references in the police report to racial slurs. She argued that even if a technical classification differed, the hateful nature of the attack was undeniable. If it didn't meet a strict legal definition, she suggested, it still occupied similar moral territory. Mark gave a short, incredulous laugh. He said she was inventing phrases now. He repeated that his actions were wrong full stop. However, he argued that trying to publicly retrieve him decades later for something he had already faced consequences for felt less like justice and more like vengeance. Joy leaned in, her voice sharpening. She emphasized that he had served only 45 days in county jail. She referenced the typical sentencing guidelines for assault with a deadly weapon and implied that many defendants receive far harsher penalties. Her implication was clear: he had benefited from leniency. Mark's voice rose again as he asked what she expected from him now. Did she want him to undo the past? To serve additional time? To abandon his career and disappear from public life? He demanded clarity about what outcome would satisfy her. She answered immediately. She wanted transparency, she said. She wanted him to stop presenting his journey as an inspiring redemption arc, and instead admit that his life might have been permanently derailed had he not received opportunities unavailable to others. She maintained that many ordinary people would not have recovered so completely. Abruptly, Mark stood, his chair rolling backward across the polished floor. The movement caused visible alarm. The other panelists stiffened, uncertain how far the confrontation might go. At the edge of the set, security personnel subtly shifted closer. "You want honesty," he said, pointing toward Joy. He admitted that he had indeed caught breaks others might not. Then he explained why he believed those breaks had materialized. He spoke about relentless work, about refusing to treat his sentence as the end of accountability. He said he had spent years investing in communities, especially the one where he grew up. He mentioned hiring people from his old neighborhood, providing jobs and pathways they might not otherwise have accessed. He described it not as sainthood but as responsibility. Joy did not seem intimidated by his standing posture. If anything, she appeared invigorated. She questioned whether employing people erased the harm done in his youth. Her skepticism was unwavering. The air in the studio felt charged, every word landing with weight. Mark remained upright, emotion evident but controlled enough to keep speaking. He reiterated that he did not expect applause or forgiveness from everyone. He understood that some would never accept his transformation, but he insisted that change was possible and that he had dedicated his adult life to proving that. Joy countered that transformation does not nullify consequences. She argued that public figures often receive platforms to reshape their narratives while victims rarely receive equal attention. Her criticism focused less on his present character and more on the broader system she believed favored celebrity over accountability. Mark responded that accountability had defined his adulthood. He said he wakes up every day aware of his past and determined not to repeat it. He acknowledged that nothing could undo what happened, but maintained that growth should matter. The exchange had moved far beyond a promotional appearance. It had become a collision between two opposing philosophies, one centered on the permanence of wrongdoing, the other on the possibility of redemption through sustained effort. The rest of the panel remained quiet, caught between intervening and allowing the confrontation to unfold as it had. So that balances out the violence. Joy challenged. That erases the trauma you caused. Mark's voice thundered across the studio. He insisted he had never portrayed himself as flawless or virtuous. He had never claimed moral superiority. All he had ever said, he argued, was that he had worked to improve himself, and that effort should matter. He questioned whether she believed people were incapable of growth. Did she think a mistake made at 17 should result in lifelong condemnation with no possibility of change? Joy answered without hesitation, her tone steady and unyielding. Actions carry consequences, she said, and wealth or celebrity status should not shield anyone from those consequences. Mark pushed his chair back and began pacing behind it, dragging his fingers through his hair in frustration. Shield him, he said. He was reminded of his past constantly. During interviews and articles, every time someone searched his name online, he asked if she truly believed he had ever forgotten. He carried that history everywhere. He said, "Good." Joy replied simply. She said he should carry it. The people he harmed lived with permanent scars, so why should he not bear the weight of guilt? Her words stopped him mid-stride. He turned to face her fully, anger flashing across his flushed face. He admitted she was right about one thing: he should carry it, and he did. But there was a distinction, he argued, between carrying remorse and allowing it to consume or destroy a person. There was also a difference between recognizing one's past and letting it dictate every chapter that followed. Joy folded her arms, refusing to soften. She countered that there was also a line between genuine redemption and simple good fortune. She asked which category he believed applied to him. Mark's voice dropped, quieter but more intense. He suggested she had already decided the answer before he ever walked onto the set. In his view, she hadn't been interested in discussing his film or the themes of renewal it explored. Instead, he felt she had arrived prepared to confront him publicly and score points in front of viewers. For a moment, Joy's composure faltered, and she sounded defensive. She said her goal was accountability, something she believed others were too willing to overlook. Accountable to whom? Mark demanded. He asked who had appointed her the authority over his life, who had granted her the power to determine whether he had done enough to earn forgiveness. The public, she shot back. When someone chooses to live as a public figure and profits from their image, she argued, the public has every right to scrutinize that image and question its authenticity. Mark lowered himself back into his seat. Though agitation was still evident in the rapid bounce of his leg beneath the table, he asked whether this was truly about the public or just her personal viewpoint. From his perspective, audiences had largely shown forgiveness. They supported his films, his business ventures, and the charitable causes he backed. Perhaps, he suggested, the confrontation was less about society and more about her personal feelings toward him. "Don't make this about me," Joy snapped, her professional calm cracking at the edges. She insisted it was not personal dislike driving her questions. It was about principles, about refusing to let anyone use money or status to escape consequences. Escape? Mark echoed with a bitter laugh. He asked if she believed financial success had wiped away what happened. Did she think awards and box office numbers had somehow made it acceptable? He explained that he woke up each day aware that he had harmed someone. Every day, he tried to create something positive to counterbalance that darkness. He described it not as buying absolution but as living with accountability. At last, Sarah found her voice, attempting to shift the tone. She suggested they talk about the charitable initiatives he supported, perhaps providing a broader perspective. Joy cut her off immediately. She wasn't ready to move on. She pressed Mark again, demanding to know why he seemed to believe philanthropy erased past wrongdoing. His eyes flared again. He said he had never claimed that generosity absolved him. What frustrated him, he explained, was the implication that he had coasted through life untouched by his past, ignoring the years he had devoted to making amends. Joy responded bluntly that it would never be sufficient. He could construct schools, create jobs, or fund countless projects, but the physical damage inflicted on his victim remained permanent. The man still struggled with vision because of that attack, she said. The room fell into complete silence. Even the camera operators appeared frozen, as if afraid to disrupt the charged stillness. Mark locked eyes with Joy, his jaw tightening as he struggled to contain his anger. Seconds stretched, heavy and suffocating. The color drained from his face, shifting from red to pale. His hands trembled slightly as he processed her reminder of the lasting injury. When he finally spoke again, his voice was no longer booming. It was soft, almost fragile, yet carried more force than his earlier shouts. He kept his gaze fixed on her and spoke slowly, deliberately. He said there was a fundamental difference between them. While she saw his past as a permanent verdict, he saw it as a responsibility he would carry forever, but not as a life sentence that erased the possibility of transformation. "I'm fully aware I'm not some shining example of goodness," Mark said, his voice firm and unfiltered. "I've never sold myself as flawless. But you sit there wrapped in moral superiority, tearing into people on national television, and somehow that makes you feel justified." Joy tried to interject, but he raised his hand, cutting her off as his voice strengthened. He told her she had spoken long enough and now it was his turn. If she wanted to revisit the injury, the lasting damage, the suffering he caused, he could speak about that too. He admitted he thought about it constantly. The memory followed him into his sleep. He carried the image of the man he hurt like a shadow. But he also knew something she seemed unwilling to accept. He and the victim had found a path forward in their own way, something built privately and without spectacle. Joy's face hardened again. She questioned his version of reconciliation, implying that meetings between a celebrity and a victim conveniently served as image repair. The accusation ignited him. He shot back that there were no cameras present when he met Johnny Tren. No press, no handlers, no staged photographs. Just two individuals sitting together, confronting a painful history that had unfolded decades earlier. He rose again, though this time his movements were steadier, deliberate rather than explosive. He described what the man had told him, that holding on to bitterness had been corroding his own life. Forgiveness, he explained, was not about whether Mark deserved it but about choosing peace over anger. Yet, he added pointedly, Joy seemed to believe she understood the moral landscape better than the person directly affected. She refused to retreat. One person's forgiveness, she argued, did not erase broader harm. She referenced other altercations, other people impacted, and the wider community that had felt threatened at the time. Mark let out a drained, humorless laugh. He accused her of exaggeration, as though she were painting him as a long-term menace rather than a troubled teenager who got into violent fights. He acknowledged wrongdoing but rejected the idea that he had waged a campaign of terror. Joy responded coldly that violence rooted in racial hostility carried a deeper weight and deserved to be called out for what it was. Then his tone shifted. The anger drained, replaced by an unsettling calm. He admitted plainly that what he did had been awful, unjustifiable, fueled by ignorance and hatred. He asked if that admission satisfied her. For a brief second she looked taken aback by his measured delivery. She reiterated that she wanted honesty. He gave her more. He accused her of spending the entire segment attempting to dismantle him publicly. She had questioned his sincerity, belittled his efforts to make amends, and implied that his transformation was a lie. Then he added that the irony was impossible to ignore in her attempt to condemn hatred. She had displayed a striking amount of hostility herself. The remark landed heavily. Joy's face flushed, and for the first time she seemed genuinely rattled. She protested, insisting that accountability was not equivalent to cruelty. He pointed at her again and said what she was doing felt less like accountability and more like bullying. Tough questions required listening to responses, he argued. What he felt instead was a public shaming designed for spectacle. She stood, matching his height and intensity. She declared she did not have to tolerate being lectured by someone with his history. He cut in, finishing her thought. Someone who had made serious mistakes. Someone who had worked to change. Someone who had taken responsibility instead of deflecting blame. If she didn't want to hear that, he said, that was her choice. Whoopi attempted once more to call for a commercial break, her voice strained with urgency. Both Mark and Joy spoke at the same time, refusing to disengage, their eyes locked in challenge. Mark's voice climbed again, cresting with frustration. What bothered him most, he said, was not the revisiting of his past. It was the satisfaction she seemed to derive from the confrontation. He felt she was enjoying the opportunity to tarnish him on air. Joy's voice trembled with fury. She insisted she was defending the principle that actions carry consequences. Consequences. He exploded. He said he had lived with them for 3 decades, through professional scrutiny, personal relationships, and every private moment of reflection. He had confronted them in silence and in public, yet nothing seemed sufficient. It appeared, he suggested, that nothing short of total destruction would satisfy her. She fired back that perhaps that was exactly what he merited. The statement lingered between them like a dare. He studied her for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. Maybe, he conceded, he did deserve ruin. Maybe he deserved to lose his career, to see his family humiliated. But what he did not deserve, he said, was to be attacked by someone claiming journalistic integrity, While behaving like a playground tormentor, he turned and began walking toward the edge of the stage, signaling that he was finished. As he moved, he spoke over his shoulder. Redemption, he said, was not about universal forgiveness. It was about learning to coexist with your past and striving to do better each day. Some people, he added, seemed determined to trap others in their worst moments forever. Joy called after him, accusing him of trying to escape accountability. He stopped and pivoted back, his voice steady and clear. He was not fleeing from his past, he said. He was stepping away from what she was turning it into. There was a distinction even if she refused to see it. Security edged closer as tension peaked. The other host sat stiffly, visibly shaken. The audience remained utterly silent. Joy made one final remark, claiming his behavior proved her original point about why figures like him should not be elevated. He paused with his hand on his microphone and asked what she meant by people like me. Those who had stumbled and tried to grow. Those who had attempted to transform. He remarked that perhaps society preferred applauding perpetual judgment rather than meaningful change. He unclipped the microphone and placed it on a nearby table. Without another word, he walked off the set. Joy stood motionless, clearly stunned by how far the exchange had spiraled. The other panelists remained quiet until Whoopi finally managed to announce a break. The cameras lingered briefly, capturing the aftermath. The realization that a segment meant to challenge had instead ignited a confrontation that neither side had fully anticipated.